My name is Patrick Monroe. I'm 34 years old, a lawyer living in New York, where skyscrapers and the frenetic pace of life can easily make you forget who you are. I specialize in handling complex civil cases, lawsuits involving property disputes, contracts, or corporate interests. The job demands calmness, discipline, and sometimes a heart of steel to avoid getting swept up in my clients' emotions. But what I'm most proud of isn't my victories in the courtroom. It's the woman standing in our small kitchen humming a tune while rearranging the vase of flowers on the table. Caroline Mitchell, 26, my fiancée. The one who taught me, a dry guy buried in paperwork year-round, to slow down and realize that happiness doesn't have to be complicated. I met Caroline 3 years ago on a rainy afternoon in Manhattan. She's an architect working for a well-known interior design firm in New York. From our first meeting, I was captivated by her. Not just her appearance, but her professional demeanor. That day, she walked into my office with a gentle smile, her brown hair neatly tied up, and a notebook filled with sketches. She wore a simple white blouse, but the way she moved, the way she spoke about her design ideas exuded a refinement I'd never seen in anyone else. "What do you want this space to say, Mr. Monroe?" she asked, her eyes sparkling as if she truly believed a room could tell its own story. I didn't know how to answer. I'm a lawyer. I'm used to analyzing contracts, not the emotions of a room. "I want it professional but not too cold," I replied a bit awkwardly. She nodded, jotted something in her notebook, and began talking about using natural light, warm colors, and layouts to create a sense of intimacy. I sat there, listening to her, and for the first time in years, I found myself drawn to something unrelated to the law. In the meetings that followed, we started talking more. I began looking forward to those sessions, not just because my office was gradually becoming brighter, but because of the moments sitting across from her, listening to her speak and feeling the gentleness in her every word. One day, I mustered the courage to ask her out for coffee. "Just to thank you for turning my office into a place worth living in," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. She smiled, that smile that made my heart skip a beat, and nodded. "Just coffee, okay, Mr. Monroe? Don't think I'm easily bribed." We started with coffee, then moved on to walks around the city and weekend getaways. Caroline brought me a sense of calm. Not because she's strong like a warrior, but because her gentleness has the power to soothe even my worst days. In return, I know she finds stability in me, a foundation that lets her dream without fear of losing her way. We complement each other like two imperfect puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together. After 2 years of dating, I proposed to her. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a quiet evening in the small apartment we'd recently rented together in Brooklyn. I knelt down, holding the simple ring I'd chosen long ago, and asked if she'd build a family with me. She cried, nodded, and hugged me. "Are you sure, Patrick?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are you sure you want someone like me?" I laughed, kissed her forehead, and told her I'd never been more certain of anything. Our apartment isn't big, but Caroline has turned it into a home. She picked out every curtain, every pillow, every picture frame on the wall with all her love. Every evening when I return from the office, the smell of freshly baked bread or homemade curry greets me at the door. We eat dinner together, share stories about our long days, and sometimes just sit in silence, feeling each other's presence. That, I think, is happiness. Simple, genuine, and complete. But then I started noticing gaps in Caroline's story. Whenever I brought up her family, she deflected. "They're far away," she'd say, or, "My mom's not doing so well, honey." I didn't want to push, but the look in her eyes whenever I mentioned her parents or childhood always unsettled me. A fleeting fear, as if she were hiding a secret too big to share. The first time I really noticed this was one evening when we were watching a documentary about families reuniting after years apart. I casually asked, "Have you ever thought about inviting your parents to visit us? I mean, when we get married, they should know where you're living, right?" Caroline stiffened, her hand gripping the cushion on the sofa tightly. "Maybe? Not yet," she replied, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. Then she stood up, said she needed a shower, and left me with an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. After that, I started paying closer attention. She never talked about her childhood, never mentioned siblings, and had no stories about holidays or family vacations like the ones I shared about summers at my grandparents' house. When I probed deeper, she always found a way to change the subject or smiled and said, "The past is gone, love. What matters is that we have each other now." I wanted to believe her, to think it was just the sensitivity of someone who didn't want to dig up old memories. But the lawyer in me, the part always searching for the truth, started to stir. I could sense there was a locked door in Caroline's heart, and behind it was a story she didn't want me to touch. One evening at a colleague's dinner party, the room was bustling with chatter and laughter, and Caroline, as usual, was the center of attention with her radiant smile and charming conversation. She wore a pale green dress, her hair cascading loosely, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. But then, when a male colleague, Tom, approached to shake her hand, I noticed Caroline's body tense. It was just a polite handshake, but she took a small, almost instinctive step back, and the smile on her face vanished for a split second. "Sorry, I'm a bit clumsy," she said, forcing a laugh to cover it up, but I saw her hands tremble slightly as she gripped her wine glass. Tom didn't notice, but I did. I caught the way her eyes darted across the room as if searching for an escape. On the drive home that night, I gently asked, "Are you okay? You seemed uncomfortable at the party earlier." She stared out the car window, the streetlights flickering across her face, and replied in a flat tone, "It was just too crowded, honey. I was a bit tired, that's all." I nodded, not wanting to press her, but deep down a question began to take root. What was she so afraid of? The signs kept appearing, even in our own apartment. Every night before bed, Caroline had a habit I initially found endearing. She would always check the front door, locking it twice, then make a round to ensure every window was securely closed. "Just want to be extra sure," she'd say when she caught me watching her curiously. I smiled, thinking it was just her cautious nature. But then, there were nights when I woke up in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty. The first time it happened, I panicked, thinking she'd gone somewhere. I jumped up, walked to the living room, and found her curled up in the corner of the sofa, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her eyes staring blankly into the void. "Caroline," I called softly, my heart pounding. She flinched, turning to look at me, and for a fleeting moment I saw pure fear in her eyes, as if she'd just escaped a nightmare. "I'm fine," she said quickly, standing up and pulling me back to bed. "Just couldn't sleep." But I knew it wasn't true. That night, as she curled up in my arms, I felt her heartbeat racing faster than usual, as if she were trying to calm herself. I wanted to ask, to understand, but every time I got close to the edge of the truth, she deftly deflected. "Don't worry, Patrick," she whispered, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear. "I'm okay." But she wasn't, and I knew it. Then I noticed faint scars on Caroline's body. They weren't large or prominent, but when I looked closely, I saw them. "What's this, love?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. She pulled her hand back and answered quickly, "Just an accident from when I was a kid, honey. It's nothing." But the haste in her voice, the way she changed the subject, made it feel like I'd touched something forbidden. I started paying closer attention. What troubled me most was how she avoided any conversation about her family. I grew up in an imperfect family, but at least I had memories. Afternoon baseball games with my dad, the times my mom burned cookies and we all laughed together. Caroline, though, never spoke of her parents, siblings, or anyone from her past. When I suggested visiting her parents to prepare for the wedding, she always found a way to sidestep it. Once I tried to pin down a specific date. "We're free next month, can you arrange it?" "I'd love to meet your parents before the wedding." She went quiet for a long moment, then said, "I'll see, honey. Work's been really hectic." But she never brought it up again, and I didn't want to push her. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to pile up in my mind. The way she flinched when someone stood too close. The way she checked the windows as if afraid something might invade our lives. The way she trembled in the corner of the room on nights she thought I didn't see. And above all, the way she locked her past away like a box no one was allowed to open. With my lawyer's instincts, I knew something was wrong. I had analyzed hundreds of cases, searching for truth in conflicting testimonies, and now I sensed a massive secret hiding behind Caroline's eyes. I couldn't just sit still any longer. I needed to understand what had happened to her, not to satisfy my curiosity, but to figure out how to help her escape the darkness that held her captive. I started with the smallest clues. Caroline rarely spoke about her past, but in unguarded moments, she let slip a few details. Once, while we were watching a movie about a small town, she blurted out, "That looks just like my high school in Providence." It was just one sentence, but it was the first piece of the puzzle. Providence, Rhode Island. About a 4-hour drive from New York. I tucked the name away, not pressing further, knowing that if I dug too deep right then, she'd clam up again. I began investigating, but I did so discreetly, like I would when analyzing a case. I didn't want Caroline to feel violated. One afternoon, while she was out meeting a client, I rummaged through some old belongings she kept in a wooden box under the bed. Inside, I found a few old photos, a tarnished silver bracelet, and a small leather-bound notebook with yellowed edges. I opened the notebook, my heart pounding as if I were touching something forbidden. The pages inside trembled with Caroline's handwriting, but it wasn't the Caroline I knew, the gentle, always smiling woman. This was a different Caroline. A terrified young girl writing in shaky, scrawled letters as if her hand quivered as she wrote. "He came again last night." One line read, "I heard his footsteps." I pretended to sleep, but I knew he was standing at the door. I was too scared to breathe. I read on, my heart tightening. The following pages described haunting nights, times she hid in the closet praying no one would find her. On one page, she drew an image that chilled me to the bone. A large, shadowy figure, faceless, with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth like a monster from a nightmare. Beneath the drawing, she wrote, "I want to run away, but there's nowhere to go." I closed the notebook, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I didn't want to believe what I'd just read, but everything started to connect. The scars, the flinching, the nights she sat curled up in the corner. It was all part of a horrifying story. I sat there in our quiet apartment feeling like the world had just crumbled. Caroline, the woman I loved, had been through something terrible, and she'd carried that pain alone all these years. I knew I couldn't stop. I needed more information, needed to understand. That weekend, I told Caroline I had to go on a short business trip. "Just a small case in Rhode Island," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. She nodded, seemingly without suspicion, but there was a flicker of anxiety in her eyes I couldn't ignore. I drove to Providence, my heart heavy, knowing I was stepping into a darkness Caroline didn't want me to touch. In Providence, I tracked down the high school Caroline had mentioned in her diary. It was an old building with faded red brick walls nestled among tree-lined streets. I found her old teacher, Miss Rosalie, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. When I introduced myself as Caroline's fiancée, she smiled, but that smile quickly faded when I asked about Caroline's time there. "Caroline was a special student," Ms. Rosalie said, her voice lowering. "Very bright, very creative, but always so frightened. Some days she came to class with bruises on her arms, her neck. I asked, but she only said she'd fallen. I didn't believe her, but back then we weren't trained to handle things like that. I've always felt guilty for not doing more." Her words hit me like a knife. I thanked her, trying to stay composed, but in my mind, horrific images began to form. I left the school and went to the local hospital, where I used some lawyer connections to access old records. After a few hours, I found Caroline's name in medical reports from 10 years ago. Multiple hospital visits for accidents, a broken arm, burns, deep cuts, all documented with vague notes. But what chilled me was the frequency. A 12 or 13-year-old girl couldn't have that many accidents. I returned to New York with a Pandora's box I wasn't sure I should keep opening. The notebook, the teacher's story, the hospital records, they all pointed to a terrifying truth. Caroline's childhood wasn't just difficult. It was a nightmare, and the people who were supposed to protect her, her parents, were likely the cause. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. I wanted to confront Caroline, to hold her and tell her I knew that she didn't have to hide anymore. But I was also afraid that if I forced her to face the truth, I wouldn't be able to handle it. Afraid that she'd shut herself off again, this time for good. I drove home late that evening, my mind in turmoil. Our apartment glowed with warm yellow light, but this time it didn't soothe me. Caroline was sitting on the sofa holding a book, her brown hair falling over her shoulders. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You're back late," she said, standing to hug me. I hugged her back, but my heart was heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, read, and heard. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking at me with worried eyes. "I'm fine," I lied, kissing her forehead. "Just a bit tired." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Caroline, listening to her steady breathing. But my mind was haunted by the image of the shadowy figure in her notebook. I knew I was getting closer to a horrific truth. And though I wanted to protect her, I also knew that truth could change everything between us. I couldn't delay any longer. Each passing day I saw Caroline trapped within her own heart. She still smiled, still cooked warm dinners, still hugged me when I walked through the door, but I knew she was carrying a burden too heavy to bear. I couldn't stand by and watch it destroy her for another second. But how could I bring it up? How could I touch a wound she'd spent her whole life hiding? I'm a lawyer. I know how to ask questions to uncover the truth in a courtroom. But this wasn't a case. This was the woman I loved, and I didn't want her to feel judged or hurt again. I decided to talk to Caroline on a Saturday evening. It was a night when we were both free, and I wanted the atmosphere to be gentle and safe so she wouldn't feel cornered. I cooked a simple dinner, her favorite spaghetti with homemade tomato sauce and a glass of red wine. I played soft jazz music, and the apartment's lights were dimmed to a warm glow. Caroline emerged from the bedroom in a loose sweater, her hair tied back loosely, and smiled when she saw the table. "What's the special occasion, Mr. Lawyer?" she teased, sitting across from me. I smiled, but my heart was pounding. "Just wanted a beautiful evening with you," I said, trying to keep my voice natural. We ate and chatted about small things, her new design project, a ridiculous case at my office. But in my mind, the pages of her diary, the hospital records, and her old teacher's words swirled relentlessly. I knew the moment was coming, and I couldn't back down. After dinner, we sat on the sofa, Caroline resting her head on my shoulder, her hand intertwined with mine. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing before the most important trial of my life. "Caroline," I began, my voice low but clear, "I need to talk to you about something." She lifted her head, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "What is it, Patrick?" she asked, her voice soft, as if afraid of what I might say would shatter the peace of the moment. I held her hand tightly, looking straight into her eyes. "I know you've been through some very hard things," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I don't want to push you, but I've seen some things. Your diary, and I went to Providence. I spoke with Miss Rosalie, and I found your hospital records." I paused, watching her face. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled as if I'd just touched a wound that had never healed. "I don't want to hurt you," I continued, my voice softer. "But I can't let you carry this pain alone anymore. I love you, and I want to help you. Please, Caroline, tell me what happened." For a moment, I thought she'd run. She pulled her hand from mine, hugging herself, her eyes frantic like a trapped animal. "Patrick, you don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have dug into this. I didn't want you to know. I'm scared you'll leave me." She stopped, tears streaming down her cheeks. I wanted to hold her right then, but I knew I had to be patient, like I'd been with my most challenging clients. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, keeping my voice steady. No matter what you say, I'm here. But you can't keep living like this, Caroline. I see you panicking at night. I see your fear. I can't let you suffer anymore. Let me help you. She went silent, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. Then, as if a dam had burst, she broke into sobs. I'd never seen her cry like this. Not the happy tears from when I proposed, but wrenching, painful sobs, as if she were tearing her heart open to reveal the truth. I pulled her into my arms, letting her rest against my chest, and waited. I knew she needed time, and I was willing to wait a lifetime if it meant she'd speak. Finally, between sobs, she began to talk. Her voice trembled, halting, but each word cut into my heart like a knife. I grew up in Providence with my family, she said, but it wasn't the kind of family you think. My stepfather, Craig Donovan, he was a monster. She paused, her breathing labored. He started abusing me when I was 9. At first it was beatings, but then he did worse things. He molested me, Patrick. He did things I can't even say out loud. Her tears soaked my shirt, but I didn't dare move, afraid the slightest motion would make her stop. And my mother, Donna, she continued, her voice thick with pain, she knew. She knew everything, but she did nothing. She stayed silent, even defended him. She said if I told anyone it would destroy the family, that I'd be the one to ruin everything. I lived in fear every day, Patrick. I had nowhere to hide, no one to turn to. The scars, the hospital visits, they were all because of him. Caroline's words cut into my heart like 100 sharp knives, each one colder and more painful than the last. I sat there on the sofa in our small apartment, the warm yellow light now fading before the storm of emotions swirling inside me. She collapsed against my chest, her body trembling, her tears soaking my shirt. I held her tightly, trying not to break, but inside it felt like my entire world had shattered. Caroline, the woman whose smile lit up a room, who turned this apartment into a home, the person I loved more than anything, had lived through a hell that no one, not even I, had known about. And her mother, the one who should have protected her, had chosen to stand by that monster. I couldn't find words right away. Anger, pain, and helplessness tangled within me, choking my throat. I wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to drive straight to Providence and confront the man named Craig Donovan, the one who turned her childhood into a nightmare. But as I looked down at Caroline's red, tear-streaked eyes, I knew she didn't need my anger right now. She needed me here to listen, to be her anchor so she wouldn't fall apart. I stroked her hair, her soft brown locks slipping through my fingers, and I tried to breathe steadily to keep my voice calm. Caroline, I whispered, you don't have to go through this alone anymore. I'm here. I'll always be here. She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, her gaze a mix of desperation and confusion. But what will you think of me, Patrick? She whispered, her voice breaking like shattered glass. I feel so dirty. I feel like garbage, like I don't deserve you. I tried to hide it, to live like a normal person, but every night I see him in my dreams. I see my mother's eyes, cold and indifferent. I'm scared you'll be disgusted by me, that you'll leave me when you know the truth. Her words were another knife, deeper, sharper. My heart ached, not because of what she'd been through, but because she thought I could ever turn away from her. I cupped her face, wiping the tears from her cheeks, and looked into her eyes. Caroline, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. I don't care where you came from or what you've been through. I only care about the future we'll build together. You're not dirty, you're not garbage. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You survived all of that, and you're still here, still loving, still bringing light into my life every day. I love you, and nothing in this world could change that. She shook her head, more tears falling, but this time I saw a faint glimmer in her eyes, a hint of relief mixed with pain. But I feel guilty, Patrick, she whispered. I feel ashamed for not running away, for not screaming, for not doing anything to stop him. I let him keep going. Let my mother cover for him. I feel like it's my fault too." She collapsed, her body going limp in my arms as if her last bit of strength had left her. I held her tighter, feeling her racing heartbeat, and I knew her pain wasn't just the scars on her body but the deep wounds in her soul, carried for so many years. "It's not your fault," I said firmly, my voice steady as if I were in a courtroom. "You were just a child, Caroline. You couldn't have stopped him. But you're not that child anymore, and I'm here, right beside you. We'll face this together, okay?" She cried, her sobs softening, but she clung to me tightly as if afraid that letting go would send her falling into an endless void. I rubbed her back, whispering words of comfort, though inside a fire was burning. I didn't just want to hold her, didn't just want to wipe away her tears. I wanted justice. I wanted Craig Donovan, the man who turned her childhood into a hell, to pay. I wanted the mother who betrayed her to face the truth. But above all, I wanted Caroline to know she wasn't alone anymore. As she finally fell asleep in my arms, her face still wet with tears, I felt like the world had changed. I sat there in the dim light of our apartment, the yellow glow now just faint streaks. I looked at her, her brown hair disheveled, her brows slightly furrowed even in sleep, and I swore to myself that I would protect her, that I would make up for the years she had to endure alone. But I knew this choice wasn't simple. It meant stepping into a grueling battle, not just with those who had hurt her, but with her past, with the shadows that haunted her every day. It could affect my reputation, the career I'd built, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered more than Caroline. After the night Caroline opened up, I noticed a change in her. It wasn't immediate or obvious, but there was a subtle shift. She still checked the windows before bed, still flinched when the phone rang unexpectedly, but sometimes I caught her looking at me with a new expression, as if she were trying to believe she was truly safe, that she no longer had to run. But I knew that to truly set her free, comforting her wasn't enough. Her confession was the first step, but real justice demanded more. I'm a lawyer, and if there's one thing I'm good at, it's turning scattered pieces into a compelling story in court. This was the most important case of my life, and I wouldn't fail. I began organizing the truths Caroline had shared along with what I'd uncovered in Providence. I contacted a private investigator, an old friend named Marcus, who had helped me with complex civil cases before. "I need you to find everything you can on a man named Craig Donovan in Providence, Rhode Island," I said over the phone, keeping my voice low so no one in the office could hear. "Police records, hospital records, insurance, anything that's out there. And also anything on a girl named Caroline Mitchell from about 15 years ago." Marcus didn't ask many questions, but I knew he sensed the gravity in my tone. "Consider it done," he said, and I heard the scratch of his pen on the other end. Within a week, Marcus sent me a thin but weighty stack of documents. There were copies of Caroline's hospital records. There was also an old police report, just a few lines mentioning a domestic violence call from a neighbor, but no action was taken due to lack of evidence. I gripped the documents tightly, feeling like I was holding an untriggered bomb. Those impersonal lines were proof of Caroline's horrific years, and I swore I'd make them speak. I returned to Providence, this time not just to investigate, but to gather legally admissible testimony. I met with Ms. Rosalie, Caroline's high school teacher, again. When I asked if she'd be willing to provide a sworn statement, she nodded immediately. "I've always felt guilty for not doing more for that girl," she said, her eyes misting with emotion. "Caroline was always so scared, always wearing long sleeves even in the heat. I saw the bruises, but she never said anything." I also tracked down an old neighbor, Mrs. Margaret, who had lived next to Caroline's family. Now in her 70s with white hair, her memory was still sharp. "I knew that family had problems," she said, her voice trembling as she signed the sworn statement. "I heard screams at night, saw Caroline running to the backyard clutching herself like she was terrified of something. I called the police once, but they didn't do anything. I thanked her, but inside my anger boiled. A system had failed Caroline, and I wouldn't let it fail her again. Among the documents Marcus sent, I found a detail that made my heart race. a 1998 police report mentioning a sexual harassment allegation against Craig Donovan. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but a woman's name appeared in the report, Lisa Reynolds. I asked Marcus to find her, and after a few days he reported that Lisa now lived in a small town 30 minutes from Providence, married with 2 children. I knew approaching her wouldn't be easy. If she had been Donovan's victim, she might not want to revisit the past, but I had to try. I drove to Lisa's house one weekend afternoon carrying the same nervous anticipation I felt before a trial. She opened the door, a woman about 35 with neatly tied blonde hair and wary eyes. "I'm Patrick Monroe, a lawyer from New York," I introduced myself, keeping my tone gentle. "I'm here about a case involving Craig Donovan. I think you could help me." Lisa stiffened, her eyes darting over me as if looking for an escape. "I don't want to talk about that," she said, her voice low but firm. "I have a family now, and I don't want my kids affected." I nodded, not pushing. "I understand where you're coming from," I said. "But there's another girl, Caroline Mitchell. She went through what you did, maybe worse. I'm trying to help her, and I think you could be the key to making sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." Lisa went silent, her hands clenching together. I waited, knowing that pressing her would only make her shut down. Finally, she invited me inside, but asked that I not discuss everything in front of her husband and children. In her small living room with family photos on the walls, Lisa began to speak. Her voice trembled, tears streaming down as she described how Donovan had taken advantage of her when she was a teenager working part-time at his store. "He threatened to get me fired, said he'd tell everyone I was willing," she said, her voice choking. "I was so scared I didn't tell anyone. I asked if she'd be willing to record her account just to support the case without requiring her to testify in court." She hesitated but finally nodded. In the recording, she detailed the threats, the coercion, and how Donovan manipulated her. It was powerful evidence, proving that his behavior wasn't a one-time act but a repeated pattern. I returned to New York with a growing file: Caroline's diary, medical records, the police report, sworn statements from Ms. Rosalie and Mrs. Margaret, and Lisa's recording. I organized them meticulously, categorizing each piece of evidence as I would for a major case. But this time, I wasn't just a lawyer. I was the man who loved Caroline, and each piece of evidence was a promise that she wouldn't have to suffer alone anymore. I looked out my office window, the city lights twinkling below, and I knew I had shifted from a compassionate partner to a warrior, ready to bring Craig Donovan to justice. The next day, I returned home late in the evening carrying the file and a burning determination. Caroline was sitting on the sofa, clutching a mug of tea, her gaze distant as she stared out the window. I sat beside her, placed the file on the coffee table, and took her hand. "Caroline," I began, my voice low but steady, "I've gathered enough evidence. Medical records, statements, your diary, and even a recording from another of Craig Donovan's victims. We can file a case against him. You don't have to run anymore. Let the law speak." She froze, the mug trembling in her hands. Her eyes widened, filled with panic, as if I'd just reopened a door she'd spent years locking tight. "Patrick, you don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He'll come after me. He always said if I spoke out, he'd find me, he'd kill me. And my mother, she'll side with him. I'm not strong enough to face them." Tears rolled down her cheeks and my heart clenched. I wanted to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew she needed more than comfort. She needed the truth, a reason to believe she could fight. "Caroline," I said, gripping her hand tightly, "I know you're scared, but if you stay silent, he won't stop. He hurt you, he hurt others, and he'll keep going if we don't act. And most importantly, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here, and I'll do everything to protect you. If you stand up now, you're not just saving yourself, you're saving others who could become his victims." I paused, looking into her eyes, trying to give her some of my strength. "You're stronger than you think. You survived all of that. Now let me help you end it." She fell silent, her hands clutching the mug as if it were her last anchor. In the days that followed, I saw her wrestle with herself. Some nights, she sat curled up on the sofa, her gaze lost, as if battling her own demons. I didn't push her, but I was always there, reminding her she was no longer the frightened girl in that Providence house. One evening, when I returned from the office, she was standing at the door, her eyes red but resolute. "Okay, Patrick," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'll do it. I want to file the case against him." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her body shake. And I knew this was the first time in her life she'd chosen to fight instead of endure. But then she pulled me to sit down, and another secret came to light. "There's something I haven't told you," she began, her voice small, as if afraid her words might break everything. "I have a younger brother, Dennis. He's my mother's son, with Craig." She hesitated, her eyes filled with pain. "When I was 16, during one of the times he did those things to me, Dennis saw it by accident. From then on, he lived in fear. Our stepfather beat him, threatened him, said if he spoke out, we'd both die. Dennis never dared say anything, and I left him behind when I ran away from home." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I thought of a young boy witnessing his sister's abuse, then living in that house under the control of a monster. "Is Dennis still there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She nodded, tears falling again. "He's 18 now, but I know he's still under his control. I can't let him stay like that, Patrick. If I sue him, I want Dennis to be free." I knew immediately that Dennis was key. A direct witness who saw what Caroline endured would make our case undeniable. But convincing a young man who'd grown up in fear to testify wouldn't be easy. I looked at Caroline, seeing the mix of determination and fear in her eyes, and I knew we had to act. "We'll go see Dennis," I said. Together. We drove to Providence one weekend morning, the sky gray as if foreshadowing a storm. Caroline sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes scanning the familiar yet haunting streets. I held her hand, trying to offer her some calm, though my own heart was racing. We arranged to meet Dennis at the gate of Caroline's old high school, where he still attended. When we arrived, I saw a lanky young man with disheveled brown hair leaning against the fence, his eyes wary like a hunted animal. "Dennis," Caroline called, her voice trembling. She stepped forward, but he backed away, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cold but laced with fear. I stood behind Caroline, letting her speak first. "Dennis, I'm sorry for leaving you behind," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm here to make things right. We can stop him, Dennis. He can't hurt us anymore. But I need your help. You saw what he did to me. If you speak out, we can bring him to court." Dennis shook his head, his eyes wild with panic. "You're crazy," he said, his voice nearly a shout. "He'll kill me." He said if I ever said anything, he'd find me, make my life worse than death. He turned as if to run, but Caroline grabbed his hand. "Dennis, you're not just a witness," she said, her voice choking. "You're the only one who can end this nightmare. For you too. You don't want to live like this forever, do you?" I stepped forward, placing a hand on Caroline's shoulder to let her know I was there. "Dennis," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I'm a lawyer, and I promise to protect you. You won't have to face him alone. We have evidence, records, statements, another victim. But your words will be the strongest. You can help your sister and help yourself." Dennis looked at me, then at Caroline, his eyes wavering between fear and hope. We met with Dennis a few more times, each meeting a battle to help him overcome his fear. Caroline was patient, recounting the days they'd shared, the times she'd snuck him cookies so he wouldn't go hungry. I reassured him about the legal process, explaining I'd ensure his safety. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, Dennis nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice small but resolute. "I'll do it. For you and for me." Caroline hugged him tightly, sobbing, and I knew Dennis wasn't just a key witness. He was the final piece to bring this case into the light. Despite having enough evidence and witnesses to file a case, Caroline, with her heart always yearning for something good, still clung to a faint hope that her mother, Donna, might come to her senses. One evening, As we sat in our apartment, the yellow light illuminating her face, she gripped my hand, her voice trembling. "Patrick, I want to try one more time," she said, her eyes a mix of determination and fear. "I want to go back to the old house, talk to my mom. Maybe if she sees me, sees Dennis, she'll change. And I want to see Dennis to make sure he's okay." A chill ran down my spine. Returning to that house, the place that had imprisoned her in years of horror, was an idea that filled me with dread. But looking into her eyes, I knew I couldn't refuse. "Okay," I said, squeezing her hand, "but I'm coming with you. You're not going alone." We drove to the old house in Providence, where her childhood was steeped in trauma. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, its faded brick walls and tightly curtained windows exuding an oppressive air as if it were guarding dark secrets. When we knocked, no one answered at first. I heard noises inside, heavy footsteps, hurried whispers. Then the door swung open and there stood Craig Donovan, tall and imposing, his cold eyes glinting, reeking of alcohol. He looked at Caroline, then at me, a sneer curling on his swollen face. "What the hell are you doing back here, you little brat?" he growled, then glanced at me. "And who's this guy you dragged along?" Before I could respond, a sight stopped my heart. Dennis, Caroline's younger brother, was kneeling on the living room floor, his hands clutching his head, his face covered in bruises. A toppled chair lay beside him, and I heard his stifled sobs. Caroline screamed, rushing to wrap her arms around Dennis, tears streaming down her face. "Stop it!" she cried, shielding him. "Don't touch him anymore." I stepped forward, positioning myself between Caroline, Dennis, and Craig, facing him directly. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm, though rage boiled in my chest. "Do you know who I am, Donovan?" I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm a lawyer, and I know exactly what kind of man you are. You're going to pay for what you did to Caroline, to Dennis, and to others." He laughed, a harsh, scornful sound. "Who do you think you are coming here?" he snarled, stepping closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You don't know who you're messing with, kid." I didn't back down. "I know exactly who," I said, my voice cold as steel. "And I promise you this time you won't get away." The air was thick with tension. Caroline stood, her hand gripping my arm, trembling but her eyes blazing with resolve. She stepped forward slightly, her voice strained but clear. "You can't hide forever. I have evidence, witnesses. I'm going to bring you to justice. And this time, I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it for my brother so he doesn't have to live in the hell you created." At that moment, Donna, Caroline's mother, appeared from the corner of the room. She stood there, her face cold, her eyes devoid of emotion. "Caroline, you dare come back to make up lies, to smear this family?" she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're a disgrace, a stain on me. You think you can destroy everything with your made-up stories?" Caroline trembled, turning to hold Dennis tightly. I saw her crumble, not from fear but from the final betrayal of her mother. "You knew everything?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You knew what he did to me and you did nothing." "Why, Mom?" Donna turned away, silent, and I knew Caroline's last flicker of hope had died. I pulled Caroline and Dennis to their feet, holding them both close. "Let's go," I said firmly. "The truth may hurt, but it will set you both free. We'll fight this to the end." We left the house, ignoring the shouts, accusations, and mockery from Craig and Donna behind us. Caroline clung to my hand, tears streaming down her face, but I felt a new strength in her. A strength born from someone who had decided not to run anymore. As we drove away from Providence, I glanced at Caroline and Dennis in the back seat, holding each other, their eyes still red but glinting with a spark of hope. I realized this wasn't just a lawsuit about domestic abuse. This was a brutal battle, with Craig Donovan willing to use violence and Donna complicit in covering up his crimes. But instead of fear, I felt my resolve strengthen. I would turn my love and empathy for Caroline into a systematic legal strategy, not only to bring Craig to justice, but to free Dennis and give Caroline a chance to start anew. I returned to New York with unwavering resolve. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly, transforming the file into an airtight indictment. I filed a lawsuit against Craig Donovan on multiple charges: domestic violence, sexual harassment, rape, and threats. I also included Donna Mitchell in the list of defendants for complicity, as her silence and cover-up had enabled Donovan's crimes. Every line in the complaint was a promise to Caroline, to Dennis, and to myself that justice would be served. The case quickly caused a stir in Providence. Local newspapers began reporting with sensational headlines about a New York lawyer taking on a dysfunctional family. Caroline grew anxious, fearing that public attention would hurt her further, but I held her hand, reminding her that the light of justice sometimes requires crossing painful lines. "We're doing the right thing," I said, and she nodded, though her eyes were still filled with worry. The first court hearing took place on a cold morning in a small Providence courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, as if the room were awaiting an explosion. Craig Donovan sat at the defendant's table, his cheap suit failing to mask the menace in his eyes. Beside him was Donna, her face cold, her hands clasped tightly as if trying to hold herself together. They had hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer, James Carver, known for his smear tactics and deflections. I was prepared for this, but seeing Caroline behind me, her trembling hands gripping the chair, I knew I couldn't afford to fail. The trial began with my opening statement. I presented Caroline's medical records, her trembling diary pages, sworn statements from Ms. Rosalie and Mrs. Margaret, and Lisa Reynolds' recording. Each piece of evidence was an arrow piercing Donovan's lies, but Carver countered fiercely. He stood, his voice sharp as a blade, claiming Caroline was mentally unstable, that she fabricated stories for revenge because her stepfather didn't love her. He called her diary the product of a sick imagination, and the medical records typical accidents of a clumsy child. He even suggested that Ms. Rosalie and Mrs. Margaret's statements were tales from old women seeking attention. I saw Caroline lower her head, her shoulders shaking, and I had to suppress my anger to stay focused. The jury began to waver. I could sense it in their glances, the doubt in their eyes as Carver continued his assault. I knew that without a decisive blow, our efforts could unravel. That's when I decided to call Dennis as a surprise witness. I had prepared him for weeks, but as he walked into the courtroom, lanky in an oversized shirt, his eyes full of fear, my heart tightened. Caroline gripped my hand, whispering, "Can he do it, Patrick?" I squeezed her hand and nodded. "He'll do it." Dennis stood before the court, his voice trembling as he began. "My name is Dennis Mitchell," he said, his eyes flickering across the jury before settling on Caroline, as if drawing strength from his sister. "When I was 7, I saw my stepfather, Craig Donovan, do terrible things to my sister, Caroline. I saw him go into her room at night, saw her cry, saw him hit her when she tried to resist." He paused, swallowing hard, but then continued, his voice growing stronger. "After that, he started beating me, threatening to kill me if I spoke out. I've lived in fear for over 10 years, but I don't want to live like that anymore." The courtroom fell silent. I saw Donovan lurch forward, his face flushed, losing his composure for the first time. "You're lying," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table, prompting the judge to bang the gavel for order. But his outburst revealed his brutal nature to the jury. Donna, sitting beside him, tried to speak, denying everything. "Dennis, you can't lie like that," she screamed, but her trembling voice and contradictory words only exposed her complicity further. Dennis's testimony combined with the supporting evidence, Caroline's diary, medical records, Ms. Rosalie and Mrs. Margaret's statements, and Lisa's recording, delivered the decisive blow. The jury could no longer deny the truth. When the trial concluded after 3 grueling days, the verdict was delivered. Craig Donovan was convicted on multiple charges, facing decades in prison. Donna Mitchell was held accountable for complicity, receiving a lighter sentence, but enough to ensure she could no longer live in denial. In the days following the trial, I saw Caroline transform into a new person, yet one still fragile. She had once told me she feared the truth would break her, but now, With the truth laid bare, she was like a bird released from a cage, yet unsure how to spread her wings. "Patrick," she said one evening as we sat on the sofa, the golden light casting a glow on her brown hair, "I don't have to hide anymore. For the first time, I feel lighter. But I'm still scared. Scared that those memories will never leave me." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "They might not fade right away, Caroline," I said, my voice soft but steady. "But you don't have to face them alone anymore. I'm here and we'll get through this together." I suggested therapy not because I thought she was weak, but because I knew the wounds in her soul needed professional care to heal. She hesitated, her eyes full of doubt, as if afraid that sharing those things with a stranger would hurt her more. But after a few weeks, she agreed. "I want to try, for you and for myself," she said, and I knew it was a significant step forward. Caroline began seeing a therapist, a middle-aged woman with a warm voice and understanding eyes. The first sessions were far from easy. Some days she came home with red eyes, her body exhausted as if she'd run a marathon. "It hurts, Patrick," she said, resting her head on my chest. "Talking about those things, it's like ripping everything open again." But she didn't give up. Each week she learned to face her memories instead of running from them, to forgive herself. Not Craig or Donna, but the young Caroline who had survived those horrific years with no one to help her. I stayed by her side, listening when she wanted to share, staying silent when she needed space, and always reminding her that she was stronger than she realized. Dennis became a part of our lives too. After the trial, he left the house in Providence and moved in with us in New York. I remember the moment he stepped into our apartment, a small suitcase in hand, his eyes a mix of shyness and curiosity. Caroline hugged him tightly, sobbing, and I saw in her a fierce love for her brother, the love of a sister who had once left him behind but was now determined to make up for it. I arranged a small room for Dennis, and Caroline turned it into a warm space with paintings she made herself and curtains she chose. "He deserves a safe place," she said, and I knew she wasn't just talking about the room but about an entirely new life. Amid the healing, we began preparing for our wedding. Caroline didn't want a lavish ceremony. "No need for extravagance, Patrick," she said. "Just the people who truly care about us." I smiled and agreed. We realized that the meaning of marriage wasn't in the rituals or glittering lights. It was the affirmation that love could heal the deepest wounds, that family wasn't just those bound by blood, but those who chose to stand by each other, to protect each other. Caroline was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a warrior who had walked through darkness and found light. And I wasn't just her lover, but her partner, the one who would hold her hand through every challenge. On the morning of our wedding, I stood before the mirror in our small apartment, adjusting the pale blue tie Caroline had chosen for me. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, illuminating the vibrant paintings she'd hung on the walls, each stroke of color a piece of her story. I heard her humming a melody from the next room, her voice soft but full of life, and my heart raced with happiness. Today wasn't just the day we became husband and wife. It was the day we declared to the world that no matter how cruel the past had been, we had chosen to build a future together. We chose a small church in Brooklyn where old wooden pews and the light streaming through stained glass windows created a warm, simple atmosphere. We invited a few close friends, some colleagues from my law office, and of course Dennis. He had become an integral part of our lives, a symbol of liberation and hope. When Caroline entered the church in a simple ivory wedding dress, I felt my breath catch. She wore minimal makeup, just a touch of soft pink lipstick, her brown hair cascading gently, and the smile on her face was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was a smile of peace, no longer shadowed by fear or shame. She walked down the short aisle, her hand linked with Dennis's, who escorted her with an awkward but proud demeanor. I took her hand as she stood before me, feeling her slender fingers tremble slightly in my palm. "You okay?" I whispered, and she smiled, nodding. "More than ever," she replied, her voice soft but certain. Our vows were simple, not ornate, but every word carried profound weight. I promised to love and protect her, not just as a husband, but as a partner who would hold her hand through both light and darkness. She promised to trust me, to let me into her world, and to build a home with me where fear had no place. Dennis stood nearby, in a slightly oversized suit we'd borrowed from a friend, his eyes shining as he looked at his sister. He had changed so much since leaving Providence. No longer the frightened boy cowering in a corner, Dennis now spoke of dreams of attending college, of becoming an engineer. I saw in him a new strength, a chance at a decent, safe life he'd never dared imagine before. As Caroline and I exchanged rings, I glanced at Dennis and he nodded at me as if saying he was part of this vow too. A vow of a family built on choice, not pain. In the weeks after the wedding, we began building our new home. We moved into a slightly larger apartment, big enough for the three of us. Caroline filled it with light, painting the walls a warm beige and tending to small potted plants each day. Dennis had his own room, where he hung posters about engineering and scattered books haphazardly. I still worked at the law office, but every evening, when I returned home, I found Caroline and Dennis cooking together or playfully arguing over which movie to watch. Those small moments were proof that we had overcome the darkness. Our love didn't shy away from the past. It faced the wounds, the nightmares, and turned them into strength. Justice, though delayed, had been served, not just for Caroline and Dennis, but for all those hurt by Craig Donovan. I learned that justice isn't just courtroom verdicts. It's the journey of bringing truth to light, the courage to stand up and say enough. And family, I realized, isn't just what you're born into. It's the people you choose to love, to protect, to walk with through the hardest days. As Caroline and I stood on the balcony looking down at the bustling city below, she rested her head on my shoulder and I felt her heartbeat, steady, peaceful. Dennis was inside, his laughter ringing out from a comedy on the TV. I kissed Caroline's forehead, whispering, "We did it, my love." She smiled, her eyes sparkling like stars. "We didn't just do it, Patrick," she said. "We're living." And in that moment, under the city lights, I knew our story, a story of love, courage, and healing, had truly begun, 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 truly begun,